This is IAQradio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. This week is episode 603, and we welcome Claudette Hanks Reichel to the show. Dr. Reichel from the LSU Ag Department and LaHouse. And we're going to talk about hurricanes, sustainability, and restoration. Before we get started, we need to thank our sponsors. They are the reason IAQ Radio is still around and still free. Our newest sponsors are the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. Learn more at iicrc.org. And Healthy Buildings America 2021, to be held in Honolulu, Hawaii, August 10 through 12, 2021. Learn more at hbs2021-america.org.
IAQ Radio Association sponsors are the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. Learn more at acgih.org. The Cleaning Industry Research Institute. Learn more at ciriscience.org. The Indoor Air Quality Association. Learn more at IAQA.org. AIHA, Healthier Workplaces, a Healthier World. Learn more at AIHA.org. And the Restoration Industry Association. Learn more at restorationindustry.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories. Learn more at aemlinc.com. Particles Plus. Learn more at particlesplus.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine. Subscriptions available at healthyindoors.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question.
Hello, everyone. The IAQ Radio Trivia question for today, Friday, October 23rd, 2020, has been sponsored by Ideas, the solution chemistry company, providing unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Congratulations go out to Doug Conan, Aerotech Environmental, Dayton, Ohio, who was first to identify crown fires as a type of fires spread by wind moving quickly across the tops of trees. Here's today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. How long ago was the noun resilience, meaning the act of rebounding, first used? Back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Cliff. Today's guest, Dr. Claudette Hanks Reichel, is a professor and extension housing specialist with the LSU AgCenter. She serves as the director of the LaHouse Resource Center, a public exhibit of multiple high-performance housing solutions, and a hub of extension education programs to advance resource-efficient, durable, and healthy housing for the southern climate and natural hazards. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Hanks Reichel.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here.
It's great to have you back. It's been so crazy this year. You know, you've got the COVID and all these other big events occurring, the fires out west, and it seems to us the hurricanes have kind of been lost in the shuffle. And when we thought about, Louisiana, we thought about you and wanted to bring you on. Can you give listeners a little update on how things are going in the recovery efforts?
I really appreciate that, because Southwest Louisiana, the coastal area, but all the way up to the middle of the state, has been hammered, and it was just a blip in the news because of everything else going on. So they are the forgotten disaster victims, and as a result, there hasn't been as much support, and they are struggling. They are really struggling. They got hammered. The Lake Charles and coastal Southwest Louisiana got hammered by the strongest hurricane to hit our coast in 150 years. Wow. But nobody realizes that. It was a Cat 4. And then 6 weeks later, another storm hit the exact same area, about 20 miles, the centers just differed. And the second storm was a very wet one that just compounded all of the problems with flooding after all of the wind damage. So there was a great deal of power outage, quite a bit of damage in those areas, and it is slow going to recovery.
And it was, I think, a little west of New Orleans, and those both hit in pretty much the same area.
Yeah, Louisiana is shaped like a boot, so it's the heel. It's the heel of the boot. So New Orleans really, dodged the bullet completely. Almost no effect, just a little bit of wind. And Baton Rouge as well. But it's that west side, like close to Texas, that really got it. And then it went across the state, and even central Louisiana got a good bit of wind damage and power outage. But the coastal part of the state, Southwest Louisiana, it was the same ones hammered by Rita after Hurricane Katrina, and it was the forgotten community there too, because Katrina and New Orleans got all of the media attention. Yeah. So these folks finally recovered from Rita, then came Ike, and then now Laura, and the double whammy with Delta has really made hard conditions there.
What kind of help is most needed in those communities right now?
Well, folks are struggling with all of the bureaucracy and the red tape to with their insurance and to try and get assistance. Many people are displaced. They still haven't got, they were without water and power for a long time. So, I'm sure that they need, reputable contractors and businesses to come in and help because there's not enough locally. But the donations have been slim compared to the amount of damage because there's been so much competing for people's media time and attention. So I would encourage people to, to help, to consider either through their faith-based organization that has a presence there, or if they want to make a donation to the Community Foundation for Southwest Louisiana, that's a major help organization there, as well as the United Way agencies of that region. And another organization that started after Katrina, the St. Bernard Project, SBC, does a marvelous job with building and rebuilding better performing, higher quality, and resilient homes. And I think that they're, about to get involved as well. So those are some wonderful ways to help. And of course, I'm sure volunteers are welcome, but, generally through the faith-based organizations are the best way to do that.
You're also in the middle of a pandemic at the same time as these hurricanes have hit. I didn't really prep you for this, but how has that affected the recovery efforts, if at all?
It has been, that has added to the complication, particularly in terms of evacuations. The evacuation centers, were basically not utilized. So folks were sent to hotels all over the state and in Texas. And there's, a lot of people are still there, those who didn't have resources on their own. So it's affected that as well as the cleanup and restoration, it's had an impact there. And then damage assessments have been hampered by needing all these, COVID protocols in the process, down to the disaster centers. So, fortunately, we're not at our biggest peak of the COVID that we had earlier. We were the highest per capita, in terms of cases, the positivity rates of tests in early on, and now that's dropped, but it's still an issue. We're in phase 3. We have a mask mandate, and so it does make it difficult. Plus, just thinking cleanup, you can't get an N95 respirator.
Yeah.
The general public, they're not available, and so they're having to make do with what they can get, like these KNs or something like that. So so many people do their own, tear down and clean up and deconstruction and clean up, and they can't get the proper personal protection respirators.
I'm wondering if there's a concern that, with people going to shelters, I'm sure there is some concern that you may see cases rise again. Like you said, you were a hot spot for a while. It seemed to have settled down.
That's why they didn't use the shelters. They sent people, the state, those who could not, who needed help, who didn't have a place to go, didn't have resources. The state is booked rooms in hotels. So they contracted with hotels, and which ironically kind of helped that industry, which is really suffering because tourism is dried up during the pandemic. So it did complicate things.
You've got a triple whammy hitting you. You've got the hurricanes, you've got COVID, and you've got the economic nightmare that's occurring through a lot of places around the country. Where is Louisiana and New Orleans with respect to restaurants and bars, and I know that's a big part of the tourism industry down there. Are you in a shutdown mode, or are they allowed to be open right now?
We're in a partial reopening mode, what we call phase 3, or the CDC's phase 3, and so restaurants are back open with, I believe, 50% capacity, and seating. Mask wearing is required, but not while you're eating. So they need to social distance. So, you can't seat people close together. But actually, New Orleans has had a slower reopening because they were such a hotbed in the beginning of the pandemic due to Mardi Gras, it's assumed. Yeah. They were one of the nation's big hotbeds. So they have been more cautious and slower, which, that's a tourism economy. So it has been devastating to New Orleans, but they are starting to reopen. There's starting to be, some business to the hotels as well. But, things indoors, that has been an issue. Fortunately, we still have more warm weather down here. I mean, not everyone would agree that's fortunate, but it means that people are outdoors a lot. So we haven't started to see the cold weather indoor spikes that, the more northern states have.
I had scheduled this for kind of later in the call, but while we're on the topic, how are things at LSU with respect to COVID? Is the school completely open? Is it a mix of things? And maybe you can talk a little about the AgCenter too, and how COVID has affected them.
It's a hybrid. The university is open, classes are in session, but many of the classes, especially the very large, freshman, sophomore levels, and the very large classes are online. Other classes are at, I believe, 50% capacity, so they're having to have additional sections. So for the teaching faculty, it has been a huge workload to make this adjustment to online, think about testing and proctoring and everything that has to, conversion of what you do to online, and labs are, a real head scratcher. But the university is open. We have very strict protocols. As far as my center, I don't teach students, but we have LaHouse Resource Center. So just recently, when we moved to phase 3, we have reopened it to the public, but by appointment only, with a limit of 6 people at a time.
I see.
And so we're still doing some of our training classes, but we limit it to 50% capacity of the meeting space. And everyone is required to wear a mask through the whole darn thing.
I see. Hey, Clifford, do you have a question or follow-up? I wanted to make sure I gave you a chance to jump in.
Yeah, I do, and I'm not sure whether or not you'll know the answer, Claudette, but if someone was affected by the hurricane and filed an insurance claim, and then 6 weeks later, they're reaffected by the hurricane and file another claim, Can they have two claims at the same time, or do you have any idea? Because I'm sure a lot of people are facing this, and I'm just wondering what the answer is.
Yeah, I believe that they can make two separate claims. You know,
Okay.
they're two separate events, two separate peril events. The issue is that there's two kinds of insurance that that come into play here. Homeowners insurance is what would cover the wind damages,
Right.
but it does not cover flood damage or
gotcha.
storm surge damage. And so storm surge is this, you know, it sort of, you know, excuse the pun, muddies the waters, because you have destruction from that. And so you know, it's hard to tell which of the destruction is from wind and which is from storm surge.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there's some indication. But the first storm, Laura, was a wind event. There was some flooding, but it didn't bring us to the coastal community, but further in into Lake Charles, there was not as much flooding. The second storm, Delta, was a wet one, and the wind was not as strong, but it brought more flooding. And so, you know, that's a terrible double whammy. I mean, here people are with damage to their homes and their roofs, blew tarps on them, and the second storm comes 6 weeks later, blows off the tarps and floods.
Yeah.
I mean, just, you know, the stress that it takes, you know, that it causes, and the toll that it takes. The community of you know, of Calcasieu Parish, Cameron Parish is kind of wiped out. Calcasieu Parish, which is where Lake Charles is, and some smaller towns, and Evangeline Parish, they are really, really hammered.
Thank you.
Well, we encourage listeners to go ahead and, you know,
Please help.
see if they can help out in some way, whether you can volunteer or send a couple of bucks, please do. It's been a tough year for those in Southwest Louisiana. I think I got that right.
Exactly.
On the last time we had you here about a little over, I guess, 2.5 years ago now.
Has it been that long? Jeez.
It has. and we learned while you were in graduate school, you started to focus on trends. So the first one being, you know, post-disaster repair. Then you got focused more on energy efficiency, and then indoor air quality, and now sustainability, which kind of pulls them all together and integrates them all, which you talked about on the first show. What I'm curious about now is what new trends, if any, are you seeing?
There are two that I'm working on, you know, are focusing a good bit on now, or what's new is one is resilience. Resilience has really finally come to the forefront. I mean, we worked on disaster recovery and disaster resistance. We used to use the term mitigation. Everybody hated that word. But resilience has a broader definition, but it's come to the structure, to the home as well. And I'll tell you, you know, interesting, after Katrina, you would think that really would have brought it to the forefront, and it started a little bit, but it was slow. About a dozen years ago, I was asked to present, you know, how to combine resilience with energy efficiency at EBA, the Energy Environmental Building Alliance Conference. 6 people came to the session. It was kind of a bust. Then 2 or 3 years ago, I was asked to speak on a similar kind of topic, standing room only in the room. And these are energy efficiency focused kinds of, you know, builders and practitioners and designers and program folks, you know, all about energy. So I figured, oh, they're all about energy. Then I said resilience. Well, now they are. It's part of Department of Energy's Building America program. They're focusing on it. They're bringing a lot of resources into their solution center for people. So it's not just a FEMA thing anymore. It is, you know, pervasive. I see it in the design community and the building community really starting to focus on resilience, which has a broader definition than just damage resistance. You know, to me, what resilience means is the ability to bounce back quickly after a disaster. So you have enough disaster resistance, but also strategic in terms of the design of the structure, you know, the materials used, as well as the whole community and the infrastructure, to be able to resume normal life quickly and affordably, as inexpensively and with as much do-it-yourself, as possible too. So the ability to bounce back quickly, because that is, what complicates housing damage after a disaster. It's not so much how a house is damaged and then what you should do after that. That's a big part of it. But the other part that really complicates it is that you're not the only one. There may be hundreds of thousands or hundreds of thousands of others in the same situation. So there's not enough of anything to go around to recover. There's not enough materials. Prices escalate, and there certainly are not enough qualified contractors locally available. So the scammers just swoop in and they take advantage of people who are desperate to get back in their homes. So we see so much of that, of unqualified scammers coming in and doing poor workmanship or unfinished work, and then they take people's life savings while they're waiting for some disaster resistance. So that is really, it takes from being a disaster victim to then being a victim again. And that is why, our program has focused so much in recent years on resilience and how to make your homes more resilient so you can bounce back more quickly. The other trend and issue, of course, is COVID. And so COVID has amplified. We've been doing indoor air and healthy home programs since the mid-90s, but now it has a whole new, perspective and a breadth to it. So, we've done some, I've done some training and some, outreach, some writing and so forth on reducing COVID risk within your home, of healthy home issues as a result of it. Everything from, people doing all these home improvement projects while they're stuck at home and the lead paint hazard that may be creating, to what you can do to maximize the immunity of your family members, and then to reduce the risk of transmission among family members in the home. So the air quality, the ventilation issues, negative pressure, all of those kinds of things. We're trying to get that information out too.
That's interesting. What I'd like to do is, John, if you could put up the LaHouse website. We talked earlier in the week, and I think what we looked at earlier in the week was a really good example of how you're looking at resilience and how you're helping people either do it themselves or make sure that contractors that are doing the work for them are following a set of guidelines, essentially, for putting things back more resilient than they were when they were initially built. And I think one of the terms you used, I want to make sure I get that right here. Where did I put that one? Flood-proof walls, flood-hardy restoration.
Flood recovery icon there.
Yeah, you were talking about flood-hardy restoration. I thought that was a really interesting term.
That has kind of been my soapbox, and it started when I first came into this job in the 80s, but it's evolved, and we have new products and materials that can make it, much more robust and easier to accomplish. Flood hardy is really, a takeoff on the concept of wet flood proofing, but I don't like that term because no one understands what it means. That's the FEMA term, and you see there's a publication about wet flood proofing. Wet flood proofing is about making it to where the waters come in, but they do little damage. And so that's, elevating what you can, your equipment and so forth, some of your outlets and wiring, and using flood damage resistant materials. But flood hardy, we started working on that after Katrina because of, the depth of the flooding. And the concept is that the flood, the base flood elevation that people are required to build above is woefully inadequate compared to the risk. We had huge floods here in the Baton Rouge, central Louisiana in 2016. That was our great flood that nobody remembers because it wasn't a storm. And then the next year, Hurricane Harvey, hammered the Houston area. So between the two, in those 2 years, we had probably about 300,000 homes that had been flooded, and 3/4 of them were not in a flood zone. Okay, get the message here?
Wow.
It happens a lot. And so that is where I really ramped up our efforts, on not just flood hardy new construction like we did after, like we worked on after Katrina, but flood hardy restoration to homes that are not going to be raised. The majority of the housing that was damaged in those floods were slab on grade homes with brick veneer siding. What the heck are you going to do with that? People did not have the money, even those with the few who had flood insurance, the claims did not provide for taking down the brick veneer to be able to replace damaged structural sheathing, and put a new weather resistant barrier and do everything right from the outside. So people were gutting their homes. They finally knew to do that, to gut the homes and pull out all the wet stuff. And then the questions started pouring in. My pun is that I was flooded. I didn't flood, but I was flooded with questions. And then so they kept coming in so much that I finally decided to develop those FAQs that you saw on the website to answer a lot of those common questions, make it, available online, and also throw in some questions people weren't asking a lot, but should be, so that's where we get a lot of the healthy home, and indoor air information in there as well. But people were scratching their heads about what to do. They had this old blackboard, fiberboard sheathing that was just mush. So they cut it away and then not know what to do at that point.
And they cut it away from the inside.
The inside, they take out the drywall, they take out the insulation, they see, the condition of the sheathing, and they cut it away and then say, now what?
Yep.
Now what do we do? So, and should we remove it? But what if it's all moldy? So all these questions came in. And so at that point, my team and we also, kind of tandem worked a little bit with Joe Stebrick, building science. And we came up with three alternative restoration solutions to deal with that, that I wouldn't call they're not best practice. Best practice is remove the brick veneer and do everything from the outside. But the reality is it ain't gonna happen. It just can't happen. So here is one of them. This is the one that I really like the best. It's very robust. It's the concept of using the new rain screen products that are normally used for, for basements and so forth. That is a drainage mat with a fabric, on one side, to keep stuff from going through, and put that up against the brick from the inside to maintain that drainage gap and space. But it's, it's thin, less than ½ an inch generally. And then restore the brick ledge flashing. Generally, what's easiest to do that is to use the liquid applied flashing materials. Do that. Remove the mortar droppings that are blocking the weep holes. So you clear out those weep holes. Put in this rain screen. You can cut it, section 16 on center, and just push it in. And then using closed cell spray foam that can be applied, and it'll squish between that and the studs, and then fill another 2 inches between the studs and the cavities. And so that way you can leave the brick ties in place, you can leave all the hardware in place, and that spray foam, as it cures, it does not take in water if it's closed cell. And so it becomes your weather resistant barrier and your insulation, which is also airtight, which they probably didn't have before, more R value because it's not compressed and so forth than they had before. And it becomes structural. So the cured 2 to 3 inches of closed cell spray foam would have a similar structural load capacity to structural sheathing, wood structural, like plywood or OSB. So it replaces all of those things with really a superior end result to what you had before. The problem with this is that it is, a more costly restoration than just going back the way it was, and you need good quality closed cell spray foam applicators. So chances are, maybe in hard to get as well, or in short supply. And it takes a good bit of product. So it is a bit expensive. This next illustration you're seeing is the one that Joe Stebrick came up with, and it's a little less expensive because it's using that thin XPS fan fold that they tend to put behind vinyl siding. So using that with some little shims behind it to create a drainage space. So you put that, behind the studs in shingle fashion. And then you just use spray foam just between the studs. So you're using a little less foam product, and that's a less expensive product than the rain screens. But I have to tell you, it's a real pain to install, and you have to remove all the brick ties in the area where you're doing it. So you may need to then use some retrofit. So it's it's more difficult to do, though less expensive. Then the third
but it's still less expensive than taking all your brick down and rebuilding.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, even the first one is less expensive than redoing your brick veneer. This third one is not as robust, but it's something that people can do without a spray foam applicator. It's something that contractors and individual do-it-yourselfers can do. And you see how the this is just kind of a demo. You see how the sheathing is cut away in just that one wall bag cavity, and then and so rigid XPS extruded polystyrene foam was cut to fit in the space. So you have to you have to measure every stud cavity and cut it to fit. And then you place it in, behind the, shingle fashion behind your new flashing, brick ledge flashing, and caulk the edges. And then that becomes your drainage plane. It becomes part of the insulation. And however, it does not provide the structural capacity you're missing.
Mm-hmm.
So you may need to do some cross strapping or something like that. And it does not provide protection to the exterior side of the studs because it's between the studs.
Sure.
But this is also, all three of these systems are flood hardy. And so if you put another layer of this to get to the R13 we need, then, and this actually could then be removed after a flood to let everything dry. So it has that advantage. But all three of these systems, if a home floods once, chances are it may happen again. So when they flood again, there's nothing vulnerable. So part of the flood hardy is both using closed cell foams and flood damage resistant materials, but also leaving a space or providing access to be able to clean and disinfect and dry after a flood without having to replace. So this illustration shows the concept of using wainscoting. Like if your flood tends to be less than 3 feet, you can have removable wainscoting panels that after the flood, you take them off, you clean everything, you flush with a detergent solution, a sanitizing rinse, you get dehumidifiers to dry everything, and then you can just put it all back where you don't have to replace anything except maybe switches and outlets that were underwater. But here you can see like pop off baseboards and trim. The alternative to the removable wainscoting is to use paperless drywall with a fiberglass mat facing instead of paper, because that's a flood damage resistant material. And then you can leave gaps between the panels, and the gap would prevent wicking from one to the next.
Okay.
But in addition, if you cover it with trim, you can pull off the trim after a flood, do the washout, flush it with detergent and sanitizing rinse, if you dehumidify well enough and quickly enough, you could avoid mold. And again, leave it in place with just removing trim, clean. So what I call is a wash and wear house.
Interesting.
So
I got a break here, Claudette. This is I think a great point. We're going to stop and thank our sponsors, and then we'll come back for the second half.
absolutely.
All right. We'll be back for the second half. We've got Dr. Claudette Hanks Reichel. We're talking hurricanes, resilience, and, just sustainability along with restoration.
IAQradio industry sponsors are Particles Plus engineers and manufacturers of feature-rich particle counters and air quality monitoring instrumentation. Learn more at particlesplus.com. Count on us. Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions available at healthyindoors.com. And AEML Laboratories, free FedEx shipping, great pricing, same-day results, and never a rush fee. Learn more at AEMLinc.com. Association sponsors are the Indoor Air Quality Association, a multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Learn more at IAQA.org. The American Industrial Hygiene Association, AIHA, Healthier Workplaces, a Healthier World. Learn more at AIHA.org. And RIA, the Restoration Industry Association, the granddaddy of the restoration industry. Network with leaders. Learn more at restorationindustry.org. SIRI, the Cleaning Industry Research Institute. See more deeply through science and research. Learn more at ciriscience.org. That's CIRI science.org. ACGIH, advancing the careers of professionals working in the environmental health, industrial hygiene, and safety communities. Interested in defining their science at acgih.org.
Okay, we're back for the second half of our interview. We've got Dr. Claudette Hanks Reichel, and we're talking hurricanes, resilience, and restoration. I wanted to ask if there are any other, you've kind of been through a series of these flooding and hurricane-related events. What other things have we learned that work and don't work when it comes to resilience with respect to these situations?
Well, in terms of the wind, after Katrina, Louisiana adopted the international codes, and I tell you, the wind codes work. So if a home is built to, with proper installation to the code that is applied for that geographic area, and the wind loading depends upon your wind design speed of your geography. Those homes, even with the Cat 4 Hurricane Laura, those newer homes, they were unscathed. They perform beautifully. So the wind code is working, but the wind code is 7 times more protective than the base flood elevation in terms of the probabilities that are used, or the fudge factor that is used, how conservative it is. What's not working is our flood insurance program level of protection. And it's not that flood insurance doesn't help people. Of course it does, and it's an important program, but we have based our building guidelines on the BFE, the base flood elevation, which was developed as an underwriting guideline for the flood insurance program. It never, in my opinion, should have been the basis of construction, because it's woefully inadequate and it depends upon flood maps that may be outdated. Plus, it's based upon what they call the 100-year flood, but I hate that term, because what that really means is a 1% probability in any given year. So that means, a good quality home that lasts 100 years has a 100% probability of being flooded during the life of that house. That's what that really means. And about 25 or 30% over the life of a mortgage. That's a huge risk.
Yes, it is. Wow.
And plus, yes, you saw so many homes outside of flood zones do flood. So that is that is, I think, what is not working. And I know that there is a movement to try and make some changes to the flood insurance program to help. So when people are flood, perhaps they can get a larger claim to do some flood damage resistance improvements, not just put it back the way it was. But right now, the way the program is, it only provides enough money to put it back exactly the way it was. So just inviting the same level of damage and loss that occurred over and over. So that I feel, really needs reform and change. And so it amounts to people who have their own resources. You see them making improvements, making their homes more flood damage resistant or flood hardy, if you want to use my term, flood resilient in the future. But people who don't have their own extra resources just don't have the capacity to do that. And it's sad. It's
Sure.
sad. And which means they also don't have the capacity to, hire the industry that's listening to this, because even with the flood hardy, if the materials aren't damaged, they still need safe cleanup. So we still need the water damage restoration contractors to do cleanup, to do the dry out, because they have the types of dehumidifiers that people need to avoid mold. And so, that industry is still very crucial, even if you have the most flood hardy, washable, drainable, dryable assembly. Which is kind of what we promote. We still need proper cleaning and drying.
You mentioned when we were talking about this topic before, Fortified Roof, and you sent me an article on that.
Yes.
And there was I think he was an insurance representative who was talking about how well that has worked for them, and
that is the other thing that's really working. The number one loss after hurricanes is roof damage. And so there is an organization called the Institute for Business and Home Safety that really is a trade organization of the property insurance industry, but this is a research entity where they've done lots of wonderful research and they develop programs. And they developed a program called Fortified. And it's evolved over the years. It was brand new when LaHouse was built. And so we built it to fortified standards. So we built it to, 130 mile per hour wind resistance, higher than what you would normally need for Baton Rouge. It was elevated 3 feet above the BFE instead of just at the BFE. The program required 2 feet, things like that. We have the windborne debris protections, and so it's a variety of things, but they've evolved the program. It's really wonderful. They have 3 levels now. So the first, instead of just all or nothing, the first level is called Fortified Roof, because that is where the most damage is. And it's a third-party certification program that some insurance companies provide discounts for that certification. Some communities provide benefits to have that certification. But even if you don't have that or you don't get the certification, the guidelines are online and they're free for you to hand to your roofing contractor and to specify what you want. And they're practical. So now, unlike before Katrina, now you can get wind-rated shingles. You can get better underlayments, and you can inexpensively do things to create a secondary water barrier so that if you do lose shingles in an extremely high wind event, you don't get all the water entry and all the damage from that. And so the Fortified Roof guidelines, look up disastersafety.org, and then that takes you to the website of IBHS and all of their information. So that is a really great program. Alabama has an organization that has embraced it and encouraged it. And Hurricane Sally, the homes that had fortified roofs, did great, and the homes right next door that did not do great. So so there you go. So that is Sally Recovery. So absolutely. So you can see just follow the guidelines, whether or not you do the certification. But check with your insurance. People should check with their insurance companies to see if they can get a discount on their homeowners for a fortified roof.
Yeah, that was in the article too, that you may be able to get a discount on homeowners. That was interesting to see. I was glad we talked about that.
Right, it's up to the company. Some companies do, some don't. So just ask yours.
Sure. All right. What I'd like to do here is, Claudette, let's go to the roundup, and we can bring in Pete Consigli and make sure Cliff gets a chance to ask a question, and then we'll wrap things up. Final thoughts, questions before we roll?
I'm going to give my time to Pete. I'm good.
Okay. I have a feeling Pete will have a few comments. Go ahead, Pete.
Wow. Cliff, have you been watching these Senate hearings? He yielded his time to the gentleman from Florida.
That's right.
Now, listen, you got a lot of experience with this, Claudette, because, you're just in the zone down there where they constantly get hit. And when we were kind of chatting, before we went on the air, one of the things that I've noticed in the area is that there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of things that are going on with the insurance companies, the consultants for the insurance companies, a lot of the national restoration firms that come into all of these different hurricane zones from other parts of the country. And a lot of times I think they don't always understand the cultures and the norms of those areas, and many times that becomes very problematic in just handling the claims, particularly when some people come in to do some work, then they leave, they go back. It takes a while for those to get settled, and then you have other people that get involved and they don't always know the history. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it's the property owners that kind of have the brunt of this. So every year, it seems, the industry hears about these kind of things. The one thing that I will say to you, I of all the years that I've known you, it really dates back to the 90s when me and Mac Pierce were doing the training down there, when I first met Paul and Glenn Ray, and all those local Cajuns that have been part of our association over the years. Your whole outreach to the Extension Institute, I think, is pretty unique. I don't know whether other universities have that, funded through their states around the country or not. But
well, every state has extension, but they don't necessarily have a housing program. It's rooted in agriculture.
Right.
So there's really just a handful that do housing related educational outreach.
Well, you guys kind of stumbled into this whole indoor air quality thing, and I don't know if that was by accident or whatever, but I think it's a good thing. But the one thing that I want to say is, let me tell you where I think the opportunity is, based on some conversations with some people that reached out to me to ask for my advice from a restoration perspective, is I believe there's an opportunity, and whether this can work, whether it's going to probably happen anyway, but whether it can help through your, through the Extension Institute, I think that this education needs to take place after the hurricane season's over with the school districts, all the large self-insured groups down there, the ones that may have certain insurance coverages, but every time a major loss hits, they always exceed it, right? So when the insurance companies get involved early on with their people, oftentimes what they do is they spend a bunch of money. In other words, they're going to max out that claim, but if the front-end people go too far, they take the decisions away from the organization that ultimately you're going to wind up have to self-pay, which usually is taxpayer money. And I think there needs to be some education that's done. And I've had people down there tell me this, and I think there'll be opportunities for experts in our industry to partner to do training in those areas, the institutions, the commercial, those buildings. I mean, whether it filters down to residential, I don't know. There's a lot of that going on. But I think in those self-insured entities, because I think there's a lot of time, energy, money wasted, all those kinds of things. And I think it's just really an education thing that needs to happen. Now, it'd be something certainly offline I'd love to talk with you about. But it has to happen, in the first and second quarters of a calendar year before the hurricane season comes. You have to be lined up and know ahead of time what you're going to do, how you're going to handle it. And that
Right.
seems to me to be all the education stuff that's right in your alley. So that's kind of, what and listening to you, it just reinforced all of that, because I'm listening, every year you probably could tell these same stories, couldn't you?
It is kind of on repeat.
Yeah, so I think this is important because not only is it important to serve the citizens of the area, it's important, for the industry to, not to get a black eye sometimes. Sometimes we deserve a black eye, but a lot of times we don't deserve it. And I think there's a lack of understanding of how insurance claims work, how, when it goes past insurance proceedings. I think people need to be educated in this so that they can make good decisions on, not just the technical decisions of what to do, but just how to handle how to just handle the process. Because, Marty King said years ago when the industry evolved, he said, people are vulnerable at that time.
Right.
And they need to be able to trust people who are going to come in there, have a code of ethics and conduct, and they're not going to take advantage of the situation. And I'd like to think that, we have a certain group of people in the industry that abide by that. Not everybody does, but, every industry have opportunists. And then, so the general public and people who are at that stage, they need to know how to differentiate between the people that are opportunists and, not be distrustful of anyone and say, well, who are the people that we can depend on? And the people that have outreached to me, they want to differentiate that. This is what they want to know. To wrap up there, Mr. Joe, they want to know, number one, what are the proper procedures, standards? How do we know what the best practices are? Number two, how do we know how to find the right guys, how to qualify them and all that? And then number three, they want to know how can they integrate training with their clients, and the people that they serve in the area. And anyone who does any kind of hurricane work, and this can date back as long as I can remember, when they come from out of an area to go to Texas, Louisiana, Florida, and the Carolinas, those are the main areas that always get hit with hurricanes. It's always best to either become licensed in those areas, or better yet, most of them, if they're not going to open offices there, they partner with people who are licensed in those areas, who are the locals, and they know how to advise them so that they, they don't get into the social issues that are affected by the local culture. The company can know what they're doing, but if someone thinks, I don't trust this guy because he's north of the Mason-Dixon, well, then that's not going to accomplish anything. So anyway, I always enjoyed listening to you, and I hope we're going to have summer camp this year.
Oh, I hope so. I missed it last.
I reached out to the good camp counselor because I'm trying to get my calendar date set for next year, because there's a lot of industry events that are being pushed back because of the COVID that normally would be in the spring that are going into summer. So I did get verification that we're going to still be the same dates, and it's going to be the 25th silver anniversary, because the 24th year was not canceled or postponed. Apparently there was some kind of wine toast activity that took place.
Yeah, a few of us did
so
that.
Next year we're having the 25th silver, and I hope it goes down as usual. So we're going to have to stay tuned. And with that, I'll thank my friend, the Z-Man, for yielding his time. Claudette, I enjoyed it. And with that, I will yield back to Mr. Radio Joe to close it down or do whatever you got to do.
Thank you, Pete. No, I appreciate that. I just wondered, Claudette, if you had any comment on what, Pete was suggesting there. It seems like even LSU may be interested in, learning more about how to protect themselves from these types of issues.
I think there's a lot of insight, and that was very interesting, what Pete was suggesting. I work strictly, with the housing, side of it, housing industry. So I'm not familiar with how the self-insureds with public and commercial properties, but I learned something. So I think that, that's a great suggestion and an important, effort to make. And yes, I wholeheartedly agree. In our state, you are required to be licensed, if you do work that that ends up costing more than $7,500. So yeah, that needs to be done in advance too. But there are cultural issues. But the self-insured, that's yeah, I learned something about that. So I applaud you, and let me know, if there's anything I can do to help facilitate.
I wonder if you have any tips for restoration contractors that are, coming into Louisiana to help with the drying and cleaning of these buildings.
Yes, I would say that, I would really encourage them to, one, get registered or licensed here in the state, rather than just try and piggyback off of someone else's license or registration, and to to learn about the types of homes that we have over here, and apply some techniques to try and make them, what I have a little phrase, improve or restore for more than before. And rather than just put it back the way it was, look into ways that can make the house more resilient, and try to help your customers find a way to do that. The other thing is to have written contracts, and that's not norm around here, but I think it would protect both sides if they came in, and it would make them appear more professional, as well as if they had written contractual agreements that spells out, lien waivers and all of that, put in protections for the customer, as well as for yourself in that. And so that would give, I think, help to provide more confidence to the customer.
Is part of we went over the frequently asked questions. Is there anything in there about for contractors that are trying to do this type of work, or is it all geared toward the building owners, the homeowners?
It was written primarily for the homeowners, but it also applies to the people doing the work. It's not the business side of it. There's nothing there to help them with their business side of it. Our Louisiana licensing board of state contractors, they put out information and their website and so forth to help with that, and to provide the regulatory environment and the registration process, but the how-tos, to make assessments, to decide what to do, to be aware of lead, base paint in older homes, and how to deal with that, and the drying threshold that we like to see. So, contractors that are not professional water damage restoration contractors don't know this stuff.
Right.
Hey, Joe, so listen, I want to comment on a couple things that Claudette said. The first thing, Claudette, I never was suggesting, and I'm not suggesting, that people piggyback off someone else's license. What happens is, oftentimes it can be complicated to get your own licenses. So what happens is they partner with that contractor and work with him under his license. A lot of people do that, and I think that's okay, because you're right. If someone piggybacks and there's no control, they're kind of running wild. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I think that was your main point. Now, the other thing that I was a little taken back by, and I want to verify this with you. If Louisiana is a state that requires state licensing for contractors, normally under those laws, and all the states that I'm familiar with, it requires that a contractor has to have a written contract. And you said it's not that common down there, kind of like it's a good old boy handshake agreement, and I get that, but that creates a lot of confusion. So isn't it the law that you have to have a written contract under state? Oh boy, that's a problem then.
Wow.
That's a big problem.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, though. That's an excellent point to bring up.
That's a huge problem, because our industry is very, very competent in that area through the associations with standardized agreements and contracts, because there's 11 Western states that's mandatory. You can't get paid. With everything west of the Rockies, Hawaii, they have very similar laws. And that exists in Florida, even down to counties and certain jurisdictions that have laws. And many of the states, now, from what I understood, and I'm not 100% sure, Texas tends to be can be a little bit loose in the contracting, but I don't know. But if that's not the case, number one, that should be something that should be updated. That's a state issue that needs to go through the political process, but that should be mandated. That will protect people to have those contracts. So if it's not the case, boy, anyone who would work in an area without a written contract, they already have 1 foot on a banana peel, in my opinion.
Exactly. And we see a lot of them sliding around too.
Let me piggyback off that. Claudette, there is a mold licensing law in Louisiana, so that anybody that's going into Louisiana thinking they're going to do mold remediation needs to be aware of that licensing law. And I don't think they haven't waived that requirement just because you've had so many hurricanes here recently, have they?
No, sometimes I have seen where they have waived the Louisiana licensure requirement temporarily to recognize people who are licensed somewhere else, when we have a shortage, like after a major event, but I haven't seen that occur this year.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if that ever applied to the mold remediation contract. I think that just applied to residential contractors and improvement contractors.
Okay.
But mold, yes, you must be licensed in this state, to charge $1 more to do something that's, I think there's 6 feet of mold or something like that, 6 square feet or something. I can't remember what it is, but there's a requirement, and there's a requirement that to get the license, you need insurance and all of these things, and do an application and complete a 24-hour technical training and a legal ethics kind of course, additional training there. So all that is required. We do offer one of the 24-hour technical trainings. Glenn teaches it. Pete over at LaHouse. In fact, it's going on right now. It's in day 3.
Okay.
Because of the storm, we've had some interest. So that is, that is a requirement. And in our state, you must also pass exams to be certified if you use any kind of biocide. So you have to be a
pest control.
You have to be
certified applicator.
Certified applicator. There's a certain category for that, and so it's and that's with the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So that's a separate certification. So even you can be a licensed mold remediation contractor, but cannot use any kind of disinfectant unless you get that additional. Certification.
Before we wrap this up, is there anything you'd like to add that we missed?
I guess I'd really like to encourage the concept of resilience. Encourage people to not rely on the flood insurance, BFE, to how they protect their homes, to provide a cushion of safety. And then the other thing is to help the industry be aware that there's, the era of interest in healthy home, indoor air quality in homes is really mushrooming right now. And the pandemic has added to that. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for this industry to utilize that, and to be of good service to people who are concerned about, they're spending so much more time in their homes. More people are working at home. More people are schooling at home. That, even when we don't have lockdown. So the healthfulness of homes and the designs of homes are changing. They're wanting telecommuting home offices now. They're wanting different kinds of spaces, homework spaces, and it's changed. It's changed. So I think it's a new era for this indoor air quality industry.
It looks like you were correct when you quite a while back decided what trends to focus on. They've come full circle, huh?
It really has. I mean, back in 2000, when the vision for LaHouse came up, we were trying to put it all together. So we wanted to integrate that all together. And now I don't think, we can take credit for it, but it's finally happening.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us, coming back, and updating listeners on what's happening in what we consider to be an undercovered issue, and hope to get you back again here in the not too distant future.
Well, thank you, Joe, for the opportunity and to bring awareness to the situation in Southwest Louisiana. I really do appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome. And our thanks go out to this week's guest, Dr. Claudette Hanks Reichel. Great show. Also want to thank my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli. John, you got to have faith at the controls. Most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners will be back next Friday at noon for the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.